Picture this. It's a Sunday evening. The light is going golden outside the window. You told yourself this weekend would be different. That you'd finally start. The project. The habit. The thing you've been circling for 3 months now. But instead, you've rearranged your desk. You've made 2 cups of coffee. You've opened the app, looked at the blank page, and quietly closed it again. And here's the strange part. You're not lazy. You know you're not lazy. You work hard at other things. You show up. You function. But when it comes to this, the thing that actually matters, some invisible wall goes up. And you can't explain why. There's a word for that wall. And it's not procrastination. That's just what it looks like from the outside. What's actually happening underneath is something far more specific. And far more fixable. And once you understand it, a single minute changes everything. Most people believe procrastination is a time management problem. That's the dominant narrative. Get a better calendar. Use the Pomodoro technique. Block your schedule. Be more disciplined. But here's what decades of research on motivation and behavior actually shows. Procrastination isn't a time problem. It's an emotion regulation problem. When you avoid starting something, you're not managing your schedule poorly. You're protecting yourself from a feeling. The feeling of overwhelm before you begin. The feeling of inadequacy when you imagine all the steps ahead. The low-grade dread that shows up the moment a task feels too large, too vague, or too loaded with meaning. Your brain isn't being lazy. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Avoid pain. Seek safety. And this distinction matters enormously, because when you treat a feeling problem like a scheduling problem, you get better at scheduling and no closer to starting. You end up with beautiful color-coded calendars. And a still untouched project. The real question isn't why. The real question is, why does starting feel like a threat? That changes the entire conversation in post-war Japan, a country rebuilding from near total destruction. Manufacturers were faced with an impossible problem. How do you create systemic improvement when all your resources are depleted? How do you grow when you have almost nothing to work with? The answer they arrived at became one of the most quietly powerful frameworks in human history. They called it Kaizen. 2 characters in Japanese meaning change and good, but in practice, it meant something more precise. Improvement through the smallest possible action, not a leap, not a transformation, a single, nearly frictionless step forward, every single day. Toyota built its entire production philosophy on it, and in the decades that followed, psychologists began applying the same principle not to factory floors, but to the human mind. What they discovered is what I'm going to call the minimum door. The minimum door is the smallest action you can take that counts as beginning. Not the action that makes progress, not the action that's impressive. The action so small that your brain cannot classify it as a threat. A 1-minute entry point, a door so low you can step through it without bending. It sounds almost embarrassingly small, but the reason it works is rooted in one of the most well-documented phenomena in behavioral psychology, and it's not what most people expect. Here's what nobody tells you about the modern productivity industry. It was designed for a version of motivation that doesn't actually exist. The standard model goes like this. You wait to feel motivated, then you act. Motivation is the fuel, action is the engine. Results are the destination. It sounds logical. It's also almost entirely backwards. The research tells a different story. Motivation doesn't reliably precede action, for most people, most of the time. Action precedes motivation. You don't feel like doing something. You do the smallest version of it anyway. And the motivation arrives in the wake of momentum. But we've been told the opposite our entire lives. Wait until you're inspired. Wait until conditions are right. Wait until you feel ready. And so we wait. And the longer we wait, the larger the task grows in our minds. And the larger it grows, the more threatening it feels. And the more threatening it feels, the harder it becomes to start. This is what psychologists call the intention-action gap. The space between knowing what you want to do and actually doing it. And the cruel irony is that every time you fail to bridge that gap, your brain logs another piece of evidence that you're someone who doesn't follow through. That identity starts to calcify. And now, you're not just avoiding a task. You're living inside a story about the kind of person you are. The thing is, the advice you've been given about building habits your entire life has been making the gap wider, not smaller. Wider. The brain has a structure called the amygdala, its threat detection system. When a task feels large, vague, or emotionally loaded, the amygdala fires. Not dramatically, not like fear, quietly, a low-level signal that says, not safe right now, and the prefrontal cortex. The part of you that wants to write the novel, build the business, finish the report, gets partially shut down by that signal. This is why sitting down to work on your book feels impossible. But sitting down to write one sentence feels manageable. The sentence doesn't trigger the alarm, the book does. The minimum door works in 3 parts. The first is what researchers call task onset reduction. When you strip a task down to its smallest possible entry, 1 minute, 1 sentence, 1 brushstroke. You remove enough psychological weight that the amygdala doesn't register it as a significant threat. The door is too low to feel dangerous, so you step through it. The second is the Zeigarnik pull, named after Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who in 1927 noticed something odd about restaurant waiters. They had perfect recall for unpaid orders, but forgot completed ones almost instantly. Incomplete tasks create a kind of cognitive tension that the brain actively wants to resolve. Once you begin something, even barely, your brain starts pulling you toward completion. You don't need to force your way through. The beginning creates the momentum automatically. The third is identity accumulation, every time you step through the minimum door. Even for 60 seconds, you generate a data point that says, stack enough of those data points, and the self-narrative shifts. You stop being someone who means to, and start being someone who does. The single minute isn't about productivity. It's about proof. Picture a 34-year-old woman, marketing manager, competent, respected, quietly exhausted. She'd been trying to write a memoir for 4 years, not because she lacked the material. Her life had given her more than enough. Not because she lacked skill, but every time she opened a new document, she felt it. The full weight of the thing. 4 years of stories. A narrative that had to be honest, coherent, meaningful. And she'd close the laptop before typing a word. Her therapist gave her one instruction: not write every day. Not build a routine. Not visualize your finished book on the shelf. The instruction was this: open the document, set a timer for 1 minute, write whatever you want. When the timer goes off, you're done. That's the whole commitment. She thought it was ridiculous. But she did it. 60 seconds. 4 sentences about her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of fried plantains, the sound of a telenovela in the next room. Not good sentences, just sentences. The next morning, she opened the document without thinking, wrote for 9 minutes before she noticed the time. The morning after that, 22 minutes. 6 months later, she had a manuscript. The minimum door hadn't made her a better writer. It had made starting feel like something she was capable of. Until capability was no longer something she had to think about at all. The memoir wasn't the goal. The goal was who she became in the process of writing it. Think back to that Sunday evening at the start, the golden light, the open app. The quiet closing of it. You weren't failing to manage your time. You were standing outside a door that felt too heavy to push. And every piece of advice you'd been given told you to push harder, want it more, discipline yourself more, feel worse about the gap between where you were and where you wanted to be. But the minimum door doesn't ask you to push harder. It asks you to find a door so small, so frictionless, so devoid of threat, that your brain simply doesn't bother to resist. 1 minute of real work, 60 seconds that count. Not because of what you produce in those 60 seconds, but because of what your brain does with the fact that you showed up at all. This is the part about Kaizen that the productivity world tends to strip out. It was never about efficiency. The Japanese concept was rooted in something closer to respect. Respect for the smallness of sustainable change. Respect for the dignity of the incremental. A factory that improves 1% every day for a year is not the same factory it was 12 months ago. And neither are you. The people who sustain new behaviors long term are not the ones with the highest initial motivation. They are the ones who lowered the barrier to entry far enough that showing up became the default, and missing became the anomaly. You don't need to become someone who works differently. You need to become someone who starts. And you become that person not by deciding to be different, but by collecting evidence. 1 minute at a time, that you already are. That feeling you have, the one where you know you're capable, but keep circling the thing without landing. That's not failure. That's the minimum door waiting to be found. You were never stuck because you lacked drive. You were standing outside a door someone told you had to be enormous to be worth opening. It doesn't. You weren't avoiding the work. You were waiting for permission to begin small. Tell me in the comments. What's the one thing you've been circling for months that you haven't started yet? Not the reason, not the plan, just the thing, because I think seeing it written down outside your own head is its own version of stepping through the door. If this is the kind of content that makes you think differently about yourself, subscribe. We go deeper every week on Mind Beneath.